Welcome to Chirac, where the streets are littered with murders, robberies, gangbangs, and all possible sorts of violence. The rappers from Chicago are legit gangsters, and they often engage rival gangs on their tracks. To put it short, rival gangs exchange bars, blood, and bullets on these streets. A ton of these gangsters are either locked up or 6 feet underground, but one man stood tall, King Op, FBG Wooski. FBG Wooski had seen a lot of his boys as well as his ops come and go, but he remained unflinching and unconquerable until a certain funeral. While he was mourning a fallen brother, his ops took the chance to strike.
Many of those people who were shot were leaving a funeral inside the church. 6 of them injured, 4 of them were taken by paramedics to hospitals. 2 of them drove themselves.
For his enemies to strike him down at a funeral means he was pretty much untouchable on the streets of Chicago. He was never caught slipping or lacking, but he didn't become the King Op overnight. It was a result of collective experience all the way from his humble and rough beginnings. Wear your bulletproof jackets. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of Chirac and find out what really happened to FBG Wooski. Early life before the gangster life. Marvel Williams, better known as FBG Wooski, was born in 1997. Even though Wooski later grew up to become the King Op of O Block, the Chicago rapper originally resided in the Parkway Gardens houses, the housing project controlled by the Black Disciples, from the late 2000s to early 2010s, which were the formative years of FBG Wooski. The Parkway Gardens was the center of gang shootings, mostly amongst teenagers and young adults. Also around the same time, gang activity escalated and Parkway Gardens became the epicenter of one of Chicago's most violent blocks. The 6,400 block of South King Drive was known locally as WEIC City, but began to be referred to as O Block after resident O.D. Perry was murdered. Under this new name, it has become nationally notorious, and it had the most shootings of any block in Chicago. The violence stems mainly from gang rivalries between the Gangster Disciples and Black Disciples, who both control territory near the block. These 2 rival gangs also contain 2 siblings on each side, FBG Wooski and his brother Big Mike. Wooski belonged to the Gangster Disciples, or the GD, while Big Mike belonged to the Black Disciples, or the BD. Both brothers grew up surrounded by the carnage and violence of Chicago and were drawn to it. Another of Wooski's brothers, Fella, whom he did not know very well, was killed by a member of STL EBT called Blink. And essentially, the STL EBT gang is made up of 2 gangster disciple sets who merged. This was one of the reasons why Big Mike, who had a better relationship with Fella than with Wooski, chose to become a Black disciple. Even though both brothers belonged to opposing sides, the bond of brotherhood between them remained as strong as ever. Big Mike was a respected member of the community, and he talked to Wooski from time to time, even though Wooski chose a totally different path from him. Wooski began to chill with E-Block, and he started repping STL CBT. Even at a young age, he didn't care about what people said or about him. Regardless, Wooski had to be very careful to stay out of trouble, as he was not even a teenager at this point. At the time, only the older guys from the gang shot at each other. People from WIC City knew that Big Mike's little brother was STL CBT, so they could not lay a hand on him. When Wooski was about 11 years old, he was a witness in the murder case of Marshawn Melcher. Officials suspected that a guy by the name of Kiara Reese shot and killed Marshawn, as well as injuring another guy who goes by the name Terrell Griffin. This incident occurred in August 2008 at Myring Park in Chicago. The state charged the defendant with the first-degree murder of Marshawn Melcher and the attempted first-degree murder of Terrell Griffin. The state's theory of the case was that at about 10:30 p.m. on August 8, 2008, the defendant shot and killed Melcher and shot and injured Griffin in Myring Park in Chicago after an argument erupted during a dice game. During the trial, the state presented evidence from 7 witnesses, and Wooski was one of them. Wooski testified that at about 10:30 p.m. on August 8, 2008, he observed the defendant, Melcher, and Griffin playing dice at the park. At some point during the dice game, Melcher asked the defendant to give him $2 so that he could pay for bus fare to go home. An argument ensued, and the defendant shot Melcher in the chest and then shot Griffin. Wooski said he had heard 4 shots being fired, and he claimed he did not see Melcher or Griffin with a gun. After the shooting, Wooski said he saw a person named Darius grab a gun from beneath a bush and run off with it before the police arrived. In the end, Reese was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Marshawn Melcher and also the attempted murder of Terrell Griffin. He was sentenced to a total of 76 years in prison. To date, many people still call Wooski a rat for testifying against Reese. After this whole ordeal, Wooski continued with his life, which was greatly impacted by the violent gang life he was exposed to. Although Wooski, along with his fellow gangmates, would often engage in minor beefs with members of opposing gangs, he was very intentional about avoiding beefs with the gangs to which Big Mike, his brother, belonged, because clearly it did not make sense to begin engaging in some mindless squabble with someone he was biologically related to. All these changed for good when Wooski started his beef with the entire WIC City, joining STL EBT and feud with WIC City. Around Around 2010, when Wooski was a 12-year-old, he started chilling around with FBG Duck and Tuka, and they all started shooting at TYMB. TYMB is a Young Money Black Disciple set located on 65th and Maryland in Southside Chicago. They were formerly known as 065 Young Money or Murder Maryland, up until the death of TY TYMB stands for Ty You're My Brother. The beef with many gangster disciples sets in the area, most notably STL EBT. While IC City and TMB were cool with each other as both belonged to the Black Disciples gang, Wooski was still living in Parkway Gardens when he hung out with Duck and Tuka. See, Murder was one of the people who made sure nobody could lay their finger on Wooski at the time. He also prevented the older guys from hurting Duck as well. This was due to the fact that Wooski, Tuka, and Duck would come around to YIC City to fight with the YIC City youngins at school. The youngins' beef remained with the youngins, as no older person was supposed to interfere. At the time, it was lame for an older guy to kill a 14 to 15-year-old boy. The trio of Wooski, Tuka, and Duck, along with other STL crew, started to come to YYC City often, and now the older WIC City members started handing out firearms to the younger ones. As mentioned earlier, Wooski and his gang had already started firing guns at TYMB, but not against WIYC City because of his brother Big Mike. Eventually, Wooski came to WIYC City with some younger STL members, and he came loaded this time. Although nothing major happened the first time, it was not until the next time things really started to get heated up. This time, Wooski stormed WIC City, not with youngins, but with older STL members such as Seaball and So Icy. A huge street fight ensued that Wooski was a part of. Both gangs had been at each other's necks for way long, and the Glock started coming out. Someone fired a shot, and this sudden gunfire made the members disperse in multiple directions. After the smoke had settled, lying wasted on the ground with a fatal injury was a 29-year-old WIC City affiliate who was called Reezy. Reezy eventually died at the hospital, and it was heavily rumored that Wooski was the man who pulled the trigger. This made things go from bad to worse for Wooski. Although many people don't believe Wooski could have killed Reezy because Wooski was just 12 years old at the time, but regardless of who shot Reezy, it made no sense for Wooski to continue staying in Parkway Gardens, an area that was filled with his ops. And at that point, any protection his big brother, Big Mike, would provide was lost. He officially became a top target for retaliation from a bunch of ops. Everyone in WIC City was after him and wanted to kill him. The older guys in STL took him in and let him know they had his back. This would make him even tighter with STL Wooski coming back and blowing at WIC City several times after that. And they really wanted him badly after he killed a loved and respected member of the gang, Reezy. There was an out war in Chirac, a war between STL and YYC City. The order was to strictly shoot on sight. Before now, the STL people could come to YYC City without being shot, but it was shot to kill. As the years passed by, Wooski would begin to watch all his friends drop like flies. A friend by the name of Tutu, who was only 17 years old, was murdered in an alley on the 6,200 block of South Eberhard Avenue. His bullet-riddled head and torso were discovered by a man who was walking his dog. Another of Wooski's associates, who went by the name Jaja, was clipped outside a laundromat in the back of the yard's neighborhood, right in the plain view of his mother and two younger brothers. Just another day in the city of Chicago. But the death that would hit very close to home for Wooski was that of Shondale Gregory, aka Tuka. He was clipped multiple times at a bus stop and was inevitably confirmed dead at the scene. Since then, Tuka's name has been mentioned in several diss tracks. Tuka may not have been a rapper, but his name has been dropped in so many rap songs that he has sometimes been labeled the most disrespected person in rap history by popular YouTuber Moss Slides. Rappers like Chief Keef and King Von have often mentioned him in their tracks. Following Tuka's death, things became super intense and the war in Chicago took a new turn with all hell breaking loose. Another fallen comrade of Wooski was Gakira Barnes, aka K.I., a female gang member who was moving with the Gangster Disciple set and was a close associate of Wooski. She died in 2014 after succumbing to multiple gunshot injuries. Almost 7 years after her demise, the alleged killer was named by the authorities as King Von feud with King Von. Easily the most recognizable op of Wooski, King Von was another savage from the streets of Chirac. Many often wonder why Wooski and King Von are at each other's necks, and they've been doing it for quite a long time. Wooski and King Von have ended up in a few shootouts with each other. The beef really kickstarted when Wooski murdered Reezy and Patoon, who King Von was close to. Now there are a lot of arguments online about who really clipped Patoon. The body had previously been given to Wooski, but new information had come out stating it was actually Lil B who dropped Patoon. But at the time, this would make King Von and Wooski sworn enemies. As he was unable to personally catch Wooski, Von would have to settle for the next next best thing at the time, Wooski's cousin Modell. Vaughn was bloodthirsty. He was 100% hungry for revenge. Vaughn caught both Modell and his cousin Miles slipping and gunned them both. He initially caught Modell, and when Miles bent over to try to embrace his wounded cousin, Vaughn showed zero mercy and shot him over 5 times at his back. Vaughn took the life of Modell and left his cousin Miles with bullet holes, so much so that doctors said intestines fell through their hands when they picked them up. Luckily, Miles somehow survived and remained in a medically induced coma for weeks. He was then moved to a specialty wound center and then to the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago before finally going home confined to a wheelchair. He was tutored by teachers from Leo Catholic High School so he could keep up with his education. According to Miles' father, he was not a gang member and had tried to stay out of trouble all his life. The father also stated that Modell was a wannabe gangster, but Vaughn's mission was accomplished. He ended Modell's life. Even before this incident, Vaughn had been poking his nose into Wooski's business. When his close friend Tuka died, Vaughn released a song dissing Tuka's legacy. Now it's unclear if Tuka and King Von had any personal issues with each other. But when King Von released a song called How I Rock, Tuka Pack, it became clear that he had no respect for Tuka or his legacy. In the song, King Von rapped, "Drop some, everybody holler, Von drop something, but I can't, cause all the ops dead. It's hard to drop something smoking on this Tuka Pack, and it's loud as Phenom caught Tuka ass getting off the bus. I know Tuka mad as hell, he probably tired of us, but when I die, find Tuka ass and I'ma beat him up." But after killing Modell, Vaughn had essentially called out to Wooski, and Wooski noticed him. Wooski didn't see Vaughn as much of a threat at first, but after he killed Modell, Vaughn became his main enemy. This would set things in motion that intensified their beef even more, not only towards Vaughn, but Wooski was out for all his ops. Vaughn and Wooski seemed to develop respect for each other, even as rivals, something like Batman and the Joker. They would go trade jabs on Twitter like it was nothing. This is when you see the true nature of how savage Wooski and Vaughn was. Both would compare their scores and stats on Twitter. No, I do not mean the number of streams or views. They were compared with each other for who had the most bodies clipped. Now remember, this is 2012. Wooski is around 13 to 14 years old, and King Von is about 17 to 18 years old. Also on Twitter, Wooski claimed that Vaughn had seen him at the corner store and Vaughn did nothing. Vaughn clapped back by saying that he came back looking for him and Wooski just ran away. They would continue the Twitter beef for the next few years as the battle between O-Block and STL only got worse. But their heated beef was put on hold for a while when both rappers ended up catching a case and had some deep legal troubles which involved prison time, legal troubles, and prison time. What happened next would turn the situation of things completely upside down. Remember Wooski's big bro, Big Mike? He would clip some dude by the name of Malcolm Stuckey with King Von in 2014. This would be the hit that got both him and Von booked with first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. This was a double whammy for Wooski, because as his brother was battling his charges, he was also getting investigated for gun charges, which saw him get locked up for about 2 years. Now back in 2014, Wooski's major op, King Von, was at a house party on LaSalle Street in the Englewood neighborhood of the South Side. Malcolm Stuckey was pulling up in a burgundy Pontiac Grand Prix to his friend's birthday party where a bullet fired from a gun tore into his brain. Let's take a look at how Wooski's main rival, King Von, and his big bro, Big Mike, would get implicated in this case. Before Stuckey arrived for the afternoon birthday party, a member of the Black Disciples gang, King Von, already was on site. He was chatting up other guests until he noticed 2 rival gang members at the house and took off. The birthday boy, who was cooking for that celebration, told King Von, "Don't start no mess in my house." King Von said he wasn't planning to cause trouble. "I'm not on that." He smiled at the celebrant, then left the house. But the 19-year-old King Von, who had been in and out of jail since he was 16, could not let it go. He left the party, grabbed a friend, and told a guest on the phone that he'd be right back. "Take the children inside," he said. Stuckey, who was described by relatives as not being in a gang, arrived at the party when King Von and fellow Black disciple Michael Wade, aka Big Mike, got out of a friend's Oldsmobile Alero a block away. Stuckey and some other guests planned to shoot some hoops before returning to eat the meal the celebrant was making. As King Von and Big Mike cut through an alley behind the house, Stuckey stepped onto the sidewalk to smoke a cigar, and this was where he met his horrible fate. One of King Von's rivals saw him and Wade approaching the house and fled immediately. Shooting at him as he ran, King Von chased his rival toward LaSalle Street. By the time Big Mike got to the front of the house, Stuckey was face down on the grass between the sidewalk and street, bleeding out. "Why you running?" King Von had shouted while chasing after his rivals. He and Big Mike just kept firing. Big Mike hit one man in the foot while King Von shot the other in the face, immediately breaking his jaw. Stuckey was declared dead at the scene at 6:09 p.m. Detectives notified his mother a few hours later. The other 2 shooting victims survived. Not long after, Von and Big Mike were both arrested and charged with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Von and Big Mike would be fighting this case for the next next 3.5 years. Meanwhile, Wooski would be catching his own case. In 2015, he got hit with a gun charge and spent the next few years locked up. The case against Vaughn was looking pretty grim after Big Mike out of the blue agreed to cooperate with police and testify that Vaughn was the one who fired the shot that killed Malcolm Stuckey. But, fearing being called a snitch and a rat, as well as retaliation on either the streets or behind bars, Big Mike refused to take the stand at the last minute. No other witnesses came forward to testify, and the prosecutors didn't have much other evidence to tie King Vaughn to the crime. The case immediately fell apart when Big Mike withdrew his promise to testify against King Vaughn. Both King Vaughn and Big Mike both were acquitted of murder, although Big Mike was convicted of aggravated battery with a firearm and sentenced to 28 years for the LaSalle Street shooting. In the 2020 track, The Code, King Vaughn dropped this line in reference to Big Mike. Got some locked up and they know what they know. Yeah, my homie lost trial. He'll be gone for a while. What? If he give up me, then they letting him go. Damn. He won't be back on the streets till he old. Everyone that he loved, they gonna be gone. I know that's quick to give police a tip. What? But my he never folded. All these times, Wooski's ops would have a field day on his gang when he was missing in action from 2015 to 2017, but he was about to return a bigger savage than he was previously. Release and retaliation. It was September 2017 and Wooski had been set loose. He was a man on a mission. It was Wooski against the world. Wooski would soon get his payback upon his release. The tables were turned. It was now Vaughn who was on the inside fighting his case. 2 months after Wooski got out, he took the streets and was seeking revenge for what the Get Back gang had done. O Block had caught about 7 bodies after T-Roy got killed in early 2017. Wooski was looking for revenge for Kobe of Taekwon World and Brick of STL-EBT, who were both killed simultaneously by OB600. He and a couple of STL-EBT members were looking for HK, the Headshot King, and they would eventually catch him. On November 24, 2017, Lil Cho of Taekwon World, Skinny of Jaro City, and Wooski of STL-EBT were out looking for ops. They arrived at O Block and spotted HK outside the gates. HK saw them and immediately started running into the O, as he knew his life was about to flash before his eyes. All 3 shot HK when he tried to run away. He fell to the ground, and then they went on to load his body with more bullets. This was a big score for STL-EBT. Wooski was all out for carnage and blood. Every pull of the trigger and chamber emptied was a sign of his rage and suppressed pain. Wooski was moving up in the streets of Chicago. He bumped further up the priority list for his ops, as he was becoming too much of a threat that had no fear anymore. After putting down HK, he went on to IG Live to boast about the murder, as well as send threats saying that Vaughn was next to go.
Go that HK pack. Talk about King Vaughn, his ass for the die. Tell him I said that. What you talking about?
This attracted the attention of Vaughn's crew, who were ready to mobilize to hit Wooski for his disrespect. But Wooski, being the savage he is, didn't give care one bit and continued to hunt down his ops, even coming to their own hood. This new Wooski was a different breed. He was building confidence in his street authority, even going as far as claiming his invented op blocks like TYMB, O Block, and D Block. But he was not only claiming bodies on the streets, he was setting the record straight in the studio too. He released his most popular song to date, Computer's Remix, one of the most historic drill diss records ever made. Wooski went crazy on this joint. Some fans even called it the hit 'em up of the Chicago drill era. The track contained several disses to members of O Block, both alive and dead. On Computer's Remix, Wooski mocked HK's death and took credit for the hit on behalf of the gang, although it's been widely debated whether or not he was the actual shooter or whether it was Lil Cho or Skinny. The line reads as follows: HK got caught trying to pump fake and forgot on his heels. Boom, 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 boom. And every time we on their block, somebody gonna get killed on Phonem grave. On the record, he also stated that he was trying to catch Durk or he die, calling out and making direct threats at Lil Durk and another OG drill rapper, he die. If Wooski wasn't already O Block's #1 op, he definitely was atop the totem pole now. The song got very popular, currently racking up about 30 million views on YouTube, as well as earning Wooski respect from Chicago drill fans, which only made his ops despise him even more. But now that he was the #1 target, he was going to be meticulous and calculative in his movement. He wasn't going to let his enemies derive the satisfaction of catching him lacking. His ops came up with an effective plan that could have taken out the king op of Chirac for good. It's the age-old tactic, the one King Von used himself against Wooski. Since they couldn't get to Wooski, they went after the first person they could find who was close to him. That person turned out to be rapper and Moby member Dooski the Man. Dooski the Man and Wooski were tight with each other. Dooski was a beloved member of MI, a set of the gangster disciples that are allied with STL, EBT, and enemies of 600, O-Block, and other Black Disciple sets. Both Wooski and Dooski even collaborated on the track Shooters, so obviously his death was a major loss for the gang, and after he was killed, his friends were out for blood. Now after Dooski, the Man, had been clipped, it was time for the next motion of the Black Disciples plan, shooting incident and recovery. O-Block knew that Dooski was a beloved member of the gang, and his funeral would be very large with many members there, including Wooski. Time was ticking, but King Von wasn't playing around. October 22nd, 2018 was the date, and they had all the details planned out and were so sure of their revenge that both Von and E-Dog FaceTimed Wooski the day before the funeral and promised they had a surprise for him. There was a video with both of them FaceTiming each other, and both these sworn enemies were laughing and making fun of each other. If you didn't know any better, you'd assume they were friends who were just playing around. Only on the streets of Chicago can two enemies share a laugh while scheming to end each other's life. But that's the type of relationship that Von and Wooski had shared for a long time now. They saw each other as rivals and worthy opponents, even though they detested each other's guts. The day of the funeral was intense. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew anything could happen at any time. The BDs must have been sitting outside waiting for the perfect moment to strike because they finally caught their number one op all alone by himself when he stepped outside to have a cigarette. As soon as Wooski stepped outside, some men in hoodies rolled up and sprayed the church with bullets. Some of the members decided to shoot back, and there was a lot of exchange of gunfire, and unfortunately, Wooski caught a bullet to the head. 5 other people who were leaving the building after the service were also hit. Footage from outside the church after the shooting shows how much of turmoil the entire scene was. People were spilling out into the street to help injured victims. Thankfully, no one lost their life that day, even though Wooski sustained a pretty serious shot to the head. We have to admit, it's pretty compassionless to spray up a church during a funeral session, but they were desperate and saw it as their only opportunity to catch Wooski lacking. On the streets of Chirac, anything goes and nothing is off limits. King Von delivered his promise when he said he was going to surprise Wooski, but in a way, King Von and the entire O-Block are pretty fortunate that Wooski did not die. STL EBT would have had Wooski's back big time. Even though Wooski did not die, the next few days on the streets were as hot as it had ever been. O-Block was shot up multiple times the day after. Wooski was very close to Jaro City, Taekwon World, Mob, and more. All of them would have had his back. But even though Wooski would survive the shooting with a close shave, it would take him off the streets for quite some time. The injury he sustained was serious, and he would spend the next few months rehabilitating, recovering, and relearning how to walk. Now King Von took to social media and decided to gloat about what he did to Wooski. Von would continue dissing him, claiming that the shooting turned him into a but it wouldn't take long for Wooski to be back on the streets. Sadly, King Von would lose his life on November 6th, 2020 in a blow-up with Quando Rondo. Wooski wasted no time dissing his op as a send-off to his grave. With his main op dead and buried, Wooski had no one to go back and forth with on Twitter, so Lil Durk ended up taking on the mantle. Durk wastes no time to diss Wooski. On the track Should've Ducked featuring Pooh Shiesty, Durk reminds Wooski of the shooting incident, making fun of him for having trouble moving after the shot to the head. He survived one to the head, but it f***ed up his body. You think he off an eighth of red the way that he nodded. Shortly after this, Durk's brother D-Thang would be clipped outside a nightclub in Harvey, Illinois. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that Wooski was related to D-Thang's death or whether it was even a gang-related death, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that it was a group of gangster disciples looking to get revenge for all the disses and bodies dropped. If there's one thing for sure, it's that FBG Wooski is a certified Chirac veteran. This near-death experience hasn't stopped him from still being on his grind. In a place where a lot of his people, as well as his ops, are either buried or behind bars, Wooski remains bent, but not broken. He's certainly earned his street cred. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other awesome videos on the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.